Parameters for scripts. Scripts can have parameters. They're easy to add in PowerShell. We simply put a param statement as the first statement of our script. After the keyword param, we put parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we put variables with the $sign in front of each name. If you put a single variable, you have a single parameter. If you put multiples separated by commas, then you have multiple parameters. If you simply put the variable names, the parameters are optional. The user does not have to enter them. And if they do, whatever they put after the parameter name goes in that variable. If they do not specify them, the variables will exist but be empty. Consider the example in the ISE window. There are 3 parameters for this script: include, path, and recurse. And all this script does is print out whatever's in those variables. If we were to go ahead and run the script, we would find that all those variables are empty because we didn't put anything into those parameters on the command line. If we had run our command specifying values for one or more of those parameters, whatever we specified would go into the variable. The thing we are specifying is still a PowerShell object. I made a string and put it in there. If I were to do this command again, and instead of supplying a string, I were to supply a number, it would have that number in it. Now my simple output doesn't allow us to see what kind of thing actually got put in there. So what I might wish to do is add a command in here to figure out what type of object is in that variable, which is easy enough to do by running the getType method in the object and extracting the full name property, and simply add that to my output. Then if I run my script, I'll find out what kind of object got put in. And depending on what I put on the command line, different types of objects will get put into that variable. Note that the other variables are empty because I put nothing in them. When we specify these parameters, this is the simplest version. You can be more sophisticated. Each parameter can have a type. The way that you do that is you simply specify a cast to type, as we've done in the past for the variable, which means the variable can only hold that type of data. If you try to put something else in, PowerShell will try to convert to that type. So if I were to run that same command again, now that I have a string cast on my path variable, if I supply a string, no problem, it's still a string. If I supply something else, like a floating point number, which used to be converted or created as a double precision floating point, it will be automatically converted to a string before it's put in the variable. This automatic conversion may cause you grief if you're not careful. For example, if I were to cast the recurse parameter to integer and save that, and I were to run my command and supply a value for recurse that happens to be an integer, no problem. If I were to supply something invalid, it won't be able to cast, and the user will get an error telling them they've done something wrong. That's fine. But what if the user puts in something that will convert? Like a floating point number. PowerShell will create the floating point number 7.9. It will assign it to the recurse variable, which is cast to int, and that 7.9 will magically turn into the integer 8 before it goes in the variable, which means inside the script you have no idea that the user did not actually type an integer. Does this matter for your script? That would depend on your script. Sometimes it will matter, sometimes it will not. Be aware it can happen. The other thing that we can commonly do is we can commonly assign default values by simply making assignment statements in the parameter definitions. We can assign defaults for everything, or we can leave them out. Assigning a default empty string to a variable designed to hold a string doesn't really do much for you, but it can be good form to make sure everybody who uses it understands what's going to happen if they don't specify the values. Now if I run my param script, all of my parameters have some default to go into them, and I'll see that my path now has dot in it, my recurse now has a 1 in it, and include is still an empty string, which it would have been even without the assignment of empty string as a default. Parameters can be put in for functions as well. Putting parameters on a function is simply a matter of putting your param statement at the start of your function definition. For the script we currently have, if we wanted it to be a function, we could simply wrap the entire thing in the function definition with the curly braces, and then we can simply use that command however we wish. Now when I run the params command, it will run myfunc after defining the function. If I run params and try to give it some of my parameters, it's not going to get them because myfunc is now a function and the parameters for it come from running myfunc. So if I wanted it to be useful for testing purposes or use it for an actual script, I have to remember to put those parameters where they're going to actually be used. The nice thing about doing it this way for testing is I can go back to using my ISE green run button here to run the script, because the command that supplies the parameters is built now right into the script.